Hello, and welcome to Unity Church on the Mountain from my home. The title of the talk today is, Whose Hand is at the Wheel? But let's begin by affirming together our opening statement. There is only one presence and one power in my life and the universe, God. And now before we begin, let's take a moment just to breathe. Taking in a deep but gentle breath, filling the lungs, and then relaxing and releasing that air back to the universe. And perhaps one more time, deep and gently breathing in and releasing. We bring our awareness to this present time, to this present space, and open ourselves to the one teacher in our life, the Spirit within us. And ask that something that we listen to, that we hear in these words, is just what we need to put to use in our life. And it is in gratitude that we say thank you. Amen. So whose hand is at the wheel? We're obviously not talking about driving, but it could be. Driving here is an analogy. Whose hand is at the wheel of this body? And of course the immediate thought is, well, my hand, of course. But let's look a little deeper. When I got my first copy of the Bhagavad Gita, there was an illustration, a beautiful painting in there that I didn't quite understand, but then I read about it. The painting showed a chariot. Pulling the chariot were 5 horses, each one with a little shield around its neck, representing the 5 senses. One of them was an eyeball, one of them was a hand, an ear, etc. So these 5 senses are pulling the chariot. The chariot is the body, our body temple. And then riding on the chariot is a driver holding the reins. The driver is our consciousness. And then, standing behind the driver is the master of the chariot. The master of the chariot, whose hand is at the wheel? The master of the chariot. And very interestingly, this chariot is right at the edge of a cliff, about to run off of the cliff. The driver's eyes are blind. So it doesn't know. The driver does not know about the cliff. But the master of the chariot, whose hand is at the wheel? Is it the blind driver? Or is it the master of the chariot? And if it is, then who is this master? So as we discuss this, I'd like to bring us back to the theme that I began last week with conflict. You see, conflict is something that we're always going to find in our life. It's just a part of being in this body. It's part of being a spiritual being having a human experience. The Bible talks about an adversary. This adversary has been given a name, Satan. And we quite often picture this Satan as being an entity that exists in the universe, who is against us or who is against God. But if we affirm honestly, like we did at the opening statement, there is only one presence and one power in my life and the universe. So who is this adversary? In a conflict, it's easy to think of the adversary as being the situation or the person that is stirring up the conflict. But if you'll think back to last week, what we talked about, the enemy, to love the enemy, to bless the enemy, to do the right thing, and to pray. The enemy is not the situation or the person. The enemy is that inside of us which is influencing our reaction to the conflict, so that we respond from a place of fear or anger. The adversary is pulling us away from our center. The person or the situation is our ally to be blessed. Because without the situation or this person, we wouldn't be able to see the adversary that is within us. By loving this situation or this person, by blessing them, by doing the right thing, and by our prayer, we have the effect of bringing ourselves back to center. I'd like to read a really short passage from Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 31. And I'm reading from the Lamsa translation. But this passage is the same in all the translations I looked up. And this is at the very end of verse 31. Paul says to the Corinthians this very short sentence, I die daily. What does he mean here? I die daily. We get a clue over in verse 44. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body and there is a spiritual body. Now, how is this relating to our conflict? How is this relating to the question, whose hand is at the wheel? I die daily. Who is this I that is dying? There is within us an animal mind and a spiritual mind. There's this natural body and a spiritual body that Paul talked about. So who is it that dies daily? I'm reminded of the Gospel of John in chapter 3 when Nicodemus comes to visit Jesus in the evening time. Nicodemus is questioning. He's having trouble understanding what it is to be born again. And Jesus tries to explain it to him. Because Nicodemus thinks that, well, we can't enter into the womb and be born again. But Paul tells us, I die daily. And then speaks about this natural body and spirit body. And Jesus tells us there in chapter 3 of John that we are born of water and of spirit. And it is this process of being born that he demonstrated with his life. The enemy, the adversary, is not the situation or the person, but it is something that's going on inside of us that gives the trouble. The more attached we are to this part of us, the more difficult it will be for it to die. I die daily. Whose hand is at the wheel? Is it this part of us that is blocking? Is it the adversary whose hand is at the wheel? Or is it that highest part of us, the Christ within us, whose hand is at the wheel? I know whose hand I want to be at the wheel. And so that is my goal throughout my day, throughout my life. Asking whose hand is at the wheel right now. And if I don't like whose hand is at the wheel, I can choose to change my mind and be transformed. This is the symbolic meaning of the crucifixion. Crossing out the adversary and resurrecting spirit body. Being born again. Paul says, I die daily. So whose hand is at the wheel? Whose hand is at the wheel right now? I'd like to share with you a joke. So there was a passenger in a taxi who reached out and tapped the shoulder of the taxi driver to tell them something. The taxi driver responded by jerking the wheel, sliding the car, almost hitting a bus, jumping over onto the sidewalk for several yards, and barely coming to a stop before entering a shop window. Whew. In the moment of quiet that followed, they both breathed together. And the taxi driver said, "Don't ever do that to me again." And the passenger said, "I had no idea that a little tap would scare you so much." And the taxi driver, after taking a deep breath, said, "It's not your fault. This is my first day driving a taxi. For 25 years, I drove a funeral van." Okay, so maybe that wasn't a good joke. Or maybe it was particularly funny. I've got another one for you. I've lost control. There is no end. There is no escape. And I can't find my home. I need a new keyboard. Okay, maybe the first one was better. But the point really is whose hand is on the wheel. And that's what we want to bring into our life. It's a simple question. And we can ask it of ourselves several times through the day. Whose hand is at the wheel? Especially if I'm feeling tense or upset, I can ask myself, whose hand is at the wheel? I can remember that the adversary is not the situation or the person who seems to be at the heart of the conflict. The adversary is that which in me, which allows me to respond in that way. So I can bless this situation, love it for being attracted into my life so that I can notice the adversary within me who is blocking my spiritual growth. The more difficult it is to let go, the more attached I am to this adversary within me. In the middle of all of that, I can do the right thing. And I can bless. And I can pray. Because prayer brings me back to center. Takes control of the driver, and the master, the Christ within me, is now controlling the chariot. Before, when the adversary was in control, it was like the blind driver controlling the chariot, running the body over the cliff. But with the master in charge, we have time to rein in the five senses, to stop the body from heading over the cliff, whatever that cliff might be. So whose hand is at the wheel? And that is the invitation as you go into the week, to ask yourself, as often as you remember to, whose hand is at the wheel? And don't forget, as you answer this question, your self-compassion. Just by remembering to ask the question, you have been successful. You are good right now, just the way you are. Whose hand is at the wheel? So let us take a deep breath again and affirm together our our prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever I am, God is. Thank you.